husband, George Scott, born in Newark, New Jersey, March 27th, 1839. Died in Liverpool, England, June 29th, 1889. All right. So where was it more safe for you to get an operation, at home or at the hospital? Home. Even hospitals were so dangerous back then. All right. So how many of you guys have seen the movie From Hell? At the operating gallery where you had like 100 people sitting while they're watching someone do the operating? That's what we're talking about right now. That's where he died, in one of the galleries there. Which is actually very common in a lot of Victorian era hospitals. All right. The operating theaters in many Victorian hospitals look more or less the same as many others across North America or Europe. It consisted of a stage, particularly enclosed by semicircular stands rising one above the other towards a large skylight that illuminated the area below. On days when it was cloudy, how did they light the operating room? Candles. You're exactly right. And if it was a nice sunny day, they lit the sun. So can you imagine someone opening you up by sunlight? In the middle of the room, there was a wooden table stained with blood. Pus and body fluids from past operations were still on it. Underneath it, the floor was strewn with sawdust to soak up the blood that would run off the table. In most days, the screams of those who went under the knife were deafening, while noise from the outside street would sweep in to help drown out the screams. During the Victorian period, surgery was very dangerous and not many lived to talk about it. It was to be avoided at all costs because of the high risk to die in an operating table or later from an infection. People would try not to have an operation back then. You know how we need them this day, we just go? Back then. They tried to live as long as they could without it. What do they say? The cure is worse than the cause? This is a good example right here. Performing a surgery was rare. When it did take place, many medical students and spectators would flock to the operating theater to watch the procedure. So could you imagine you're sitting there, you can't be knocked out, as you know. There's no painkiller either besides booze. You have people holding you down. You got 100 people watching you. Would you get stage fright? All right. So how do you know if you had a good surgeon? What do you look for?
Clean apron.
Opposite. They wore big brown leather aprons. The more blood crusted on there, the more experienced your doctor is. Because you got to realize they did not know about germs and bacteria back then. So why keep using a new apron when you can just use the same one over and over? All right. They rarely washed their hands or their instruments and carried with them into the theater germs and bacteria from outside. So you know how you see the doctors scrubbing their hands and everything now? Not back then. They just went in, started grabbing the instruments, and went to work. All right. Now the instruments. Were the instruments cleaned at all? They would have blood, pus, and body fluids from the last patient on them. It's disgusting. So it was safer to have an operation at home than in a hospital, where death rates were 3 to 5 times higher than they were at home. The operating theater itself was just as dirty as the surgeons working on them. It was frequently filled to the rafters with medical students. I think this thing is going out on me. All right. So not only is the doctors not disinfected, but all right. Sorry guys, it's going out on me. All right. So the surgeon's not only disinfected, but you have 100 people watching you guys. Neither of them have washed their hands or put any clean gowns on. Sorry. All right. All right, so people were packed to the, in these galleries that were packed. Some people would stand on top, and you hear people constantly saying, please move, or, head. That was very common to hear. So you have a guy trying to cut into you, and all you hear is people trying to say, move your head so I can see, and things like that.
Oh my God.
It's crazy. All right, George went in for appendicitis surgery in Liverpool, England, as you can tell by his stone. He was there on business. Back then, they did not have suction. They used old rags and cloth to suck up the blood in the area where the surgeon is working. The surgeon who was working on him had a hard time seeing what he was doing due to all the blood. So what they would do is they would rip, strips of cloth and they would stuff them into you. These are not sanitized cloths. They were just wherever they grabbed them, they ripped them up and they stuffed them inside you. They soak up the blood and they pull it out of you. But unfortunately, for George, he was bleeding so much they couldn't keep all the blood. So what they did was the surgeon accidentally cut an artery he couldn't see. And George bled to death on the operating table while 100 people stared on at him dying.
What put him in there to begin with?
What's that?
Appendicitis?
Appendicitis, which is a very basic operation now. Back then, it would have killed you like it did to George. He was there on business, so he couldn't make it back home for anybody to do it here, because back then it was still like a month on the ship to get back over here, or maybe 3 weeks. So let's say you survive the operation, have to be hospitalized for post-surgery care. What are the conditions in the hospital like? First thing you would notice while laying in your recovery bed is the mushrooms and maggots thriving in damp, dirty sheets of your bed. Where you are laying, there's mushrooms growing in your sheets and maggots are crawling. They do not clean the sheets before the prior patient. They use the same sheets over and over again. So if you have gangrene or anything else that's, spewing, it goes into the sheets and no one cleans them. At first, you would cover your nose because of the horrible smell of urine, vomit, and other bodily fluids. The smell was so offensive that your nurse and doctor sometimes walked around with handkerchiefs pressed to their noses just to keep them from puking while they were helping their patients. This is what it was like in a Victorian hospital back during the Victorian period. And I would say this carried on to about World War I, and then things changed during World War I big time. We had new inventions. We understand the disease and bacteria by World War I. And then, by 1930s, we got penicillin. Things were really changing by then. But Victorian period, I don't know, if you had appendicitis, you had to have an operation. You would die. So unfortunately for George, he didn't die from the appendicitis, he died from the surgery. All right.